fast forward some number of years to being fortunate to have been working with Michael Cole at the Laboratory of Comparative Human Cognition at Rockefeller University during the very early years of the discovery of Vygotsky's work on a more popular basis and bring the publication of Mind and Society, and also some of this very, very interesting work on what we called then the invalidity of cognitive psychology, the ecological invalidity of experimental cognitive psychology. And then being fortunate, again, to find a place where I felt I could teach comfortably, which was Empire State College, which is the non-traditional part of SUNY, where you, at least when I was there, students had individualized mentoring and group studies. You could teach whatever you wanted, whatever the students wanted. There were no grades, but there were written evaluations, and I was able to experiment a fair amount with other ways of teaching while I was there, and to work with working adults who wanted to be in school. You know, not necessarily because they weren't interested in something, but they had gone as far as they could in a career and needed a degree. But they were grown-ups, and it was quite fascinating. So at the same time that I was doing that, I met the people that I work with now in building what we call a development community, a performance community, creating many, many different projects for children, teenagers, adults, in the workplace, at schools, in therapy and after-school programs that are very much influenced by a social, cultural methodology and perspective that stems from Vygotsky, and at the same time is very different from what most people have taken from Vygotsky. And so in a way, the desire to write the book that Karen was referencing, Vygotsky at Work at Play, was to share some of the work that over 30 years has been done with this particular understanding and reading of Vygotsky, and to try myself to understand why I see Vygotsky the way I do, and most other people see him in other ways. Not to say this is the right way at all. I don't think there is one, and I am thrilled at the great diversity and variety of things that people take from Vygotsky's writings and then create other things, whether that's in architecture or science museums or a classroom or the workplace. Because I didn't understand that. I didn't, until I wrote this book, understand why I see so differently. I mean, I probably should have asked other people, and they would have told me right away, but I hadn't asked them. So now that I understand, or at least I have my story of why I see the way I do, now I feel I can challenge people who see differently, because I understand where I'm coming from, and I want to know where they're coming from in their own stories. So how I see him, and this is what I think most people would agree with, is that his mission, his desire, his overriding passion was to create a psychology that did not rule out consciousness and did not subsume consciousness to behavior. He wasn't willing to go on the behavior side or the completely subjective side. He said, no, I need what he was calling a unified psychology. And in laying out that, and how in his attempt to create the beginnings of this psychology that was neither objective or subjective, he had to engage many of the dualisms that were in the mix in this newly emerging fight for what psychology is going to be. And he had obviously engaged them in the language of early 20th century science and early 20th century Marxism. But nevertheless, there's some seeds there that are extremely useful for us in the early 21st century, where modernism and postmodern are living together in some complex way, and where the Marxism that was put into effect in the Soviet Union and other countries is pretty much not a relevant thing anymore, which to me doesn't mean that Marxism isn't relevant. I think it is. But so he engaged these various dualisms, person, environment, biology, culture, thinking, speaking, and another one that has not been given much attention by people, and I think I understand some of the reasons, is cognition and emotion. So I was trying to understand why do so few people who are influenced by Vygotsky or think his work is really good or think he has something revolutionary to say ignore emotion. Why has he been, I won't say categorized, but why has he influenced cognitive development and learning? And by learning, I mean an acquisitional, cognitive kind of learning. Why is that where everyone has gone? And then I realized the question isn't why has everyone gone there. That's obvious. That's what our education system is. That's what psychology is. The question is, why didn't I go there? Sort of turn the tables, like to understand not why doesn't anyone else think how I do, but why is this where I went? And how come I went there is that knowing Vygotsky's work and having worked with Cole and others and really getting a grasp of his, if you will, his dialectical methodology and his understanding of looking at totalities, instruction or learning and development as a totality, thinking and speaking as a totality. And by totality, I mean there's not a causal relationship between those or a transmittal relationship, but they are a unity where one has a particular relationship to the other. For example, learning, meaning, development. Vygotsky says instruction doesn't just follow developmental level, but it leaps ahead of it and then transforms. I lost my train of thought. So, where was I? What was I going to say?
Why me?
What?
Why do I think this way?
Right, why do I think that way? Thank you.
About emotion.
So, about emotion. Yeah, that's where that's where I was at. And I had been very involved with and fascinated by this form of therapy, which is not very much like therapy, called social therapy, that Fred Newman, a philosopher of science, a community and political activist, was beginning to develop. And then for the past 30 years, I've been working with him and many other people, developing that, and my role in some ways is to try to understand it as well, and in so doing to advance it. So I wanted to know, what does Vygotsky have to say about this? Can I take Vygotsky and what I understand him to be saying and gain some insight into what this social therapeutic process is? So if you're looking at therapy, you're looking at emotionality in some ways, even though I don't know how many people in here know anything about clinical psychology, but like if you look at APA, American Psychological Association books, or Guilford, or one of the big publishers of clinical psychology or psychotherapy books, the last few years there have been books appearing with the title of Psychotherapy and the Emotions. And it was like, oh, they don't really look at emotions. They look at diagnosis, and they look at medication, and they look at etiology, but hey, now they're starting to look at emotions. So naively I thought psychotherapy is all about emotions, but it turns out that in the mainstream it isn't. Which is another reason I think that Vygotsky is not very well known among psychotherapists or clinical psychologists, although that's been changing. So the way this therapy works, if you will, is that it's a group-oriented approach, which, you know, in some cases is 2 people. It's a very small group, the therapist, the client. But the activity of the therapy is to create the group. This is a completely Vygotskyan idea, my Vygotsky's idea, because I think what he was talking about was the zone of proximal development isn't a space so much as it is an activity of people together creating the environment in which they can do what they're going to do. And this is the PowerPoint one. What I did was I took down 4, I think it is, quotes from Vygotsky that are key to what I understand to be exciting and extremely relevant about his work to initiating or reinitiating or continuing learning. I want to start with the bottom. Okay. This is from Mind and Society. The search for method becomes one of the most important problems of the entire enterprise of understanding the uniquely human forms of psychological activity. In this case, the method is simultaneously prerequisite and product, the tool and the result of the study. That's become very important to the work that I and my colleagues do. Search for method. He's not saying method is something to be applied. He's saying method is something to create. Search for it. And he's saying that method is not, again, the tool, but it's simultaneously the tool and the result. So I think the ZPD is that kind of tool and result, the zone of proximal development. I think you create the environment, you create the ZPD, and creating the ZPD is simultaneously creating the result of the ZPD. Back, where does it take me? It takes me to my language development studies, to my PhD dissertation, to how do kids learn to talk. You have a baby, toddler, you have a mother, father, sister, grandmother, all day long, in various ways, they are creating these little conversations. The mother says, oh, it's 11 o'clock. Are you hungry? And the kid says, Baba, Baba. And the mother says, you want your bottle. It's an amazing thing. The mother is speaking to someone she knows will not understand what she's saying, but she's performing it in such a way as to make it comprehensible, as if it's comprehensible. The baby, to use Vygotsky's words, creatively imitates the language that he or she hears. Baba. The mother says, oh, you want your bottle. What Fred Newman and I, Fred the creator of social therapy and co-developer of many of these ideas, realized we're trying to understand that. What is, oh, you want your bottle? Or in a social therapy group, what is several people talking and responding? And that is taking us to the second quote. The relationship of thought to word is not a thing, but a process. A movement from thought to word and from word to thought. Thought is not expressed, but completed in the word. We can, therefore, speak of the establishment, that is, the unity of being and non-being, of thought in the word. The structure of speech is not simply the mirror image of the structure of thought. It cannot, therefore, be placed on thought like clothes off a rack. Speech does not merely serve as the expression of developed thought. Thought is restructured as it is transformed into speech. It is not expressed, but completed in the word. I sometimes think that's the most important thing anyone has ever said. For people interested in development and learning. So, as we know, there have been various views of language and what it is, from a representational or correspondence view to a pragmatic view. I think Vygotsky's putting forth another view of what language is that's more closely associated with the view of the later Wittgenstein. That speaking is a form of life. It's an activity. And so what is Vygotsky doing here? I mean, I'm not saying he was conscious of doing this, but this is an alternative to an expressionist view of language. It's an alternative to the view that what we are doing when we are speaking or writing is expressing our thoughts or our feelings. He's saying, no, we don't express them. The word, speaking, languaging, completes them. It's a unity, a totality, as I was talking about earlier. And we all have that experience that we don't know what we're thinking until we say it. So what Newman and I did, again, because we were looking at therapy with adults, what makes therapy work, this particular therapy, if it's based on the idea that people are not expressing their thoughts, and if what the goal is to create a zone of proximal development or a zone of emotional development, where people can grow emotionally by creating the group, and in the creating of the group, they create the result of the group, which is their growth, okay? Maybe, just maybe, you don't have to be your own completer. Maybe someone else can complete your thought. It's amazing. It excites me to think about that as a discovery, psychological discovery. Maybe, oh, it's 11 o'clock. Are you hungry? Baba. Oh, you want your bottle? Maybe we can describe that as a language game in which creative imitation and completion are going on. So on the one hand, you could say that Baba is the completion of the baby's thought, but you could also say that, oh, do you want your bottle, is the completion of the baby's thought by the mother. Completion doesn't mean reading someone's mind. It means taking it further. It means, if you will, to use the language of improvisers, it's the and of yes and. It's the adding on, it's the creating with language. So mother and baby are creating the zone of proximal development for a speaker, and they're simultaneously creating the result of creating the zone, which is the speaker. move to the first quote. I have no idea where I am.
20 minutes
Okay.
or something?
Thank you. First quote, in play, a child always behaves beyond his average age, above his daily behavior. In play, it is as though he were a head taller than himself. Head taller, very interesting, head taller. How do you create the head taller experience? You relate to people not just as who they are. If mothers related to babies as who they are, they would never get to grow. If you related to the baby as a non-speaker, you wouldn't be having these conversations. We don't have to think about it, we just do it. So you're relating, the language that I've chosen for this is that Vygotsky gives us a way into a new psychology that is about becoming. Relating to people as who they are and simultaneously as other than who they are. Relating to the baby as a baby who babbles, doesn't understand English, Korean, French, whatever it is, and simultaneously as a creature who does, as a human being who does. The dialectic of being and becoming. He didn't talk this way. I have no idea if that's what he was thinking, but certainly you can find in his writings either individual phrases or sentences or pages, and the totality is consistent. And whether or not, I don't know if that matters, if that's what it's led to as one of the many things it's led to. So, it's going to sound more coherent than it actually was in its history. That's partly what language does, is it glosses over stuff. I don't know how to say it differently. Simultaneous to these intellectual discoveries and looking at social therapy and seeing people completing each other as part of their creating their environment for relating to their emotions in different ways. Thinking, where in life, besides in babyhood, are you related to as who you are and who you're not at the same time, or who you are and who you're becoming, or who you are and who you're and other than who you are? Well, it turns out on the stage, actors on the stage, whether they're 4-year-olds or 6-year-olds in a little school play, or professionals, relate to themselves and we relate to them as who they are and other than who they are, as the character they're playing and as them. I mean, we suspend the themness of it. Don't run on to the little auditorium stage in your child's school and grab him or her off and say, what are you doing in that costume? You know, that's not you. And we don't relate to our kids' play and tell them to stop it. Of course, we do once they get to school, which is unfortunate. So that's so interesting. What do we call that? Well, we call it performing. We call it performing on the stage. So then I went back and really examined not very much that Vygotsky wrote about play. And if you look at what he wrote about free play or pretend play, which are the words that he gave to that early child play, he said that. And he said it's the child's highest level of development. That play also creates a zone of proximal development. In play, you can perform beyond yourself or a head taller. So then what is it about play? Why does play create a ZPD? Well, it creates a ZPD for very similar reasons to what I was saying earlier about the creative imitation and completion. And the allowance of imagination to dominate in play. So this led us to see performance, the capacity to perform, as an overlooked, if you will, human capacity, overlooked in psychology, overlooked in education, and in practice pretty much stifled in our contemporary culture. Ironically, it's by performing, doing what you don't know how to do, the baby talking, the baby drawing pictures, doing what you don't know how to do as part of your everyday life is how you learn when you're little. And it helps you become adapted to behaving in the correct manner of your culture. But we don't allow children or ourselves to continue to do what we don't know how to do in that way. We don't relate to each other usually as who we are and who we're becoming in a playful space that allows us to create both the environment that's needed and the result we want simultaneously. So we created a whole lot of projects, dozens, hundreds of people, that put this performance-based model to work. The therapeutic work was going on, started training programs for people, both locally and around the world, to come together. We ran a Vygotsky school for 12 years, where we just started the school every day, say, how should we perform school today? And then the kids and the adults did what they did. Many youth programs across the city now and across the country more and more. The All Stars Project, pretty much with the motto that if you can perform on stage, you can perform in life. Helping people see themselves as performers of their lives. Helping people see and helping teachers relate to their classrooms as an ensemble of performers who will take responsibility for the performance that day. One of the key things I think that goes on in that zone of proximal development for the language learning child, in that playful environment with the mother and others, is that each instance of Baba, oh, you want your bottle, is an instance of success as a learner. The child doesn't know that. I mean, doesn't know about from learning or not learning. It's a seamless part of life. But if you think about it, the experience of being a learner is very, very important to being a learner. And I think that that's something, and I hope people want to talk about that some in your little groups and in feedback, because I think that as educators, we're sophisticated about the relationship between learning and learning how to learn. And I think this third thing is again, not really, is somewhat overlooked, learning that you're a learner. I think that happens in childhood before school. Simultaneously, whatever you're learning, the thing you're learning, how to learn it, and that you're learning it. And it's that, I think, that's taken out, not consciously or whatever, in the acquisitional, knowledge-based way we do schooling. I want the last quote, and then I want to show you something. This is the third one down. The development of a corresponding concept is not completed, but only beginning at the moment a new word is learned. The new word is not the culmination, but the beginning of the development of a concept. Here, as everywhere, the development of the meaningful aspect of speech turns out to be the basic and decisive process in the development of the child's thinking and speech. The new word is not the culmination, but the beginning of the development of the concept. I don't know which came first, that quote or my thinking on this, but it kind of got mushed together. And it growing a lot out of my experience with this experimental Vygotsky school for 12 years, the Barbara Taylor School. And it seems so clear to me that that in order to learn a subject, in order to learn math, in order to learn science, in order to learn history, you had to be able to babble the talk of that subject, discipline. And couldn't kids do better at those things if they were, if teaching was modeled in some form on the language learning baby, the creating of the ZPD, the creative imitation and completion? Like, don't you have to babble math talk rather than being given an isolated word? Vygotsky's very interesting on education because he had high hopes. And he's sort of discussing instruction in a way that is almost incomprehensible to us because it doesn't look anything like what instruction has become. So if you were to babble math talk in a math class or wherever, over a drink, over a, apple juice, I guess, you would, to go back to the first quote, be playing. You would be performing as a mathematician before you know how to do it. We would be allowing kids to perform in all these different ways, mathematician, historian, whatever, as part of the process of creating the environment that will allow them to become those things. They have to participate in creating that zone of proximal development. They have to perform, and we all have to perform a head taller if we're to learn and develop. Learn in a developmental way, learn in, as Vygotsky said, the only good learning is learning that leads development. Learning that pushes us along, that is ahead, allows us to be a head taller. So performing, from the performing on the stage to the child's free play and performance and how the child learns as the playing all day long. I don't mean having fun, I mean doing things that you don't know how to do and not having a separate time called learning. From that, performing as what we do in life became very important to us, and year 2000 or so, from various travels, from reading different things, came to realize performance is a big deal all over the world for people who are dealing with social issues. Sometimes that is a kind of didactic way, and it comes from the work of Augusto Boal, who modeled in some ways his work on Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. He called it theater in the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Others are Moreno and psychodrama, some old stuff. But nevertheless, people are realizing that performing, storytelling, narrative is a way to build community. And in 2001, I organized with some other people the first of now 5 Performing the World conferences. These are international conferences where people who use performance in one way or another in work in any country, with any population and any social problem come together and share their work, interrogate the concept and practice of performance and its relationship to development, learning, community building, peace, gender, you name it. And it's growing very, very much. There are other organizations that are a little more focused, like International Drama and Education Association, which is focused on drama and education, so it's very school-oriented, international though. So I wanted to end, I think, my remarks. This is a 35-minute video, and I'm showing you 5 minutes, the very beginning, kind of a teaser. If you go down to this
I just want to have one question. Did you say that thinking and speaking are directly connected? You did, right? So how does this happen? Because I thought that thinking requires, like a temporal component, like the historical component. You need to reflect on what you said in order to be thinking. But while you're thinking, while you're talking, you're not thinking. Does this make sense? You see, like I'm right now I'm not thinking, I'm just talking. So the reflection part, we thought that it takes away from the dialectic, because in dialectic relationship you have one presupposes the other. Am I correct?
not how I understand it.
How do you understand it?
One presupposes that they are that the relationship that exists, that they're not identical and they're not separatable, but that the relationship between them is mutually transformative. The relationship between them transforms the whole thing. So thinking, speaking, and the way I understand Vygotsky understanding it, is a unity of, if you will, there are 2 elements, and that the relationship between them is that speaking completes the thought, which then transforms the thinking. The speaking, thinking thing, when it happens, is, I don't have reflection in there, I'm sorry, but I think what happens is once the speaking, like right now I am speaking.
Are you thinking about what you're saying?
I don't think I'm thinking about what I'm saying.
So, so in order to think about what you've said, you need that temporal time. You need the time. You need that historical perspective, right? So that takes away from the dialectic.
How does it take? Just say
It takes
more.
away from the dialectic relationship, because they become kind of dichotomous. Am I correct? Wrong?
Well, I think you're probably wrong. Yeah.
Most probably. He's wrong.
Yeah.
I think what's
He knows me
interesting-
for a long time, so he knows that I was wrong.
You're trying to convince her, which is kind of an interesting polemical move on your part.
I wouldn't dare. Trust me. He would beat me up after class. But I found it to be kind of interesting. I don't want to take too much time.
It's interesting. I think if I'm understanding what you're saying, it's that if you pause to reflect on what you've said, then you're breaking the
Yes, the relationship,
between
definitely.
speaking and thinking.
Okay, if I could say something about dialectical, though, because you're taking a view of dialectical, and I think a lot of people might take that view of presupposition, but this what I do with my hands is what Lois is talking about. It's the A, B, B, A kind of one flowing into the other. And there's this idea of holism as well, you know, the fact that you can't break them apart. And I think it's unhelpful to sort of say, okay, there are these four things and all four have to be there, because sometimes it's more helpful to think of a dialectical relationship this way, and other times it's more helpful to think of it that way. And to reify one way of thinking seems a bit imperialistic. So, I think that it's from an enactment point of view, you'd want to have a model where the talk and the thought are together and indivisible, but you wouldn't want to have this idea that at the moment of talk, at that singularity, you could be conscious about it. And so I think that's the point you're making as well.
Ray?
I don't know if this will help, but as a second language learner, before when I came here, I have to think first, translate
Right.
my own language to English, and then I speak. You know, that's like how many years ago? A long time ago. Every time I speak, I have to think first, what will I say that will not offend anyone? Now, having been here for like 19 years, I don't think that way anymore.
You
I
offend
don't know if that supports your.
Yes.
You're not think when you speak, you're not thinking anymore. But before, I have to really think, what kind of word I should say. You know, okay. As English language learner, so there's some I don't know if you can say this group, subgroup. That's what they did. You know, others.
We always think about the grammar, and we think about sentence structure and stuff. I mean, like that most native speakers don't think about. You take it for granted.
I was thinking about this when you were talking about thought and speech and how one sort of leads to next, sort of in a circle. And I've had the experience in, like I can speak Hebrew pretty fluently and I can speak a little bit of Spanish. So I notice the difference. Sometimes I'm just thinking in Hebrew and the words just flow, and sometimes I have to stop and translate from English, or I have to search my memory for certain vocabulary words. So I think when you're speaking a language that you're less comfortable in, all of a sudden there is this sort of delay where you notice that there's thought and then speech, and thought and then speech, and there's sort of more of a pause between them, I guess. But I guess the language that you first learned when you were a baby, they sort of roll one into the next, and you can't say one happened and then the next and the next. It's almost like they're happening simultaneously. I don't know.
Let's respond to that. Made me think about, I don't get on the stage very much, like the stage. I'm an amateur actress. But the one or two times I had to do this and had or even doing a video thing, but I had to like memorize it, like paragraphs. So frightening. The most help I got was to speak to some actors who are sophisticated in what we're talking about, you know, in a Vygotsky and a Vygotsky view, and they said, "You don't memorize it. You make it part of your conversational repertoire." And anyway, that was really remarkable to me, because it also made me understand this game that when we had the school, and now we teach other teachers to do. It's called the expert game, and it's an improv game where you have you ask the audience for a name of pick two anythings, but usually it's a fruit, name of a fruit, and a name of a piece of clothing, and then you put those two together like a banana shoe. And then you have one kid begin and be the interviewer on a talk show of the world's expert on banana shoes. And what are they doing? Why is this interesting? It's interesting because it's really fun. But you are completely freed in the sense to from knowing anything, right? Because nobody knows anything about a banana shoe. But the performance that you're doing is the performance of the expert. And it's so much of what it means to succeed in school is to perform as an expert. And to get the language of, and so you can make banana shoes part of your conversational repertoire. And it's not such a huge leap to then make, I don't know, give me a subject, you know, like, Jim, give me something. Pie, part of your conversational repertoire. Just like you're both saying, as the second language becomes, it's now part of your conversational repertoire. Anyway, that was just a thought I had of that.
I speak 4 languages. 2 I'm fluent and 2 I'm not. So when you're talking about performance and the play, so I look at it this way. In certain languages, like in English and Hindi, I consider myself, accomplished performer. So I'm doing the thinking. I'm thinking, but I'm speaking at the same time. I don't make others aware of that thinking is going on, but I'm accomplished and I'm fluent. So both things are going together. Other 2 languages, I have to think because I feel I'm not accomplished performer in that. I'm thinking, oh, this word I should use, and what will be appropriate, how my facial gesture will be, and the same in the concept, context. Like I'm here, in English language speakers, so I express myself or my thinking through my language, English language, in a certain way. Okay, so it makes words more powerful and to make others understand what I really mean. But if I'm in another context, I'm using another language, so I'm performing in a different way. So my thinking is pretty much in depth or in line with that context, with the language I'm speaking. So in that context, I'm thinking and I'm speaking, but I'm not aware. And the other context, other 2 languages I'm speaking, I have to. So the thinking and speaking and the thought and language are always related, but it depends how you feel or how you understand how you think. I don't know, I'm making myself clear.
I just didn't think, I think Vygotsky's point isn't so much though about the fluency with which one speaks a language. It's the idea, I think, that what you're thinking in your head can't be really thought until it's performed, because it changes as you make it manifest in some type of a public way. And that once you make it manifest, because you make it manifest, it just then changes the way you're thinking about it. So that process keeps on going back and forth, and what Ken always does and what you're doing is that there's no way to like stop it. There's no way to like say stop it over here, because as soon as you're over here, it's already beginning. It's constantly moving. I think when you're speaking another language, all those things become reverberated in many more ways, so that all sorts of other things come into it.
And language and thought are related.
Absolutely.
Speaking and thinking, so it's not the fluency, what you're thinking and what is coming out of your mouth. It's a relationship.
So, yeah.
I have another example. I teach anatomy and physiology, and sometimes when I'm teaching, it's almost as if I'm on automatic pilot, where I'm presenting the lesson, but once in a while there'll be a word that sort of stands out that I'm not really familiar with, so I do have this interchange where I want to go back, I want to learn more about it, I want to present it in a different way, I want to present it in a different context. So it's changing me, and it's also changing my ability to think about it and to present it differently.
One of the things we discussed in our group over here was about, our work in middle schools and the fact that there's this big cognitive bias, let's say,
and we don't talk about emotion. And we don't even talk here about emotion most of the time. And I think that part of that is that we don't know how. There's nothing that we're doing in middle school, for example, other than maybe a half-hour long advisory session a week, every other week, that deals with how children feel about their relationships, how those relationships are changing, how their relationship to subject matters is changing, how their relationship to the teacher impacts on their ability to learn. And so, I thought, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Do, a lot of thoughts on that. Vygotsky has said in his writings that a psychology that doesn't recognize the unity of cognition and affect is all it does is create a one-sided psychology. Obviously, an instructional model that does the same creates a one-sided instructional model, and my thoughts on it are mostly sadness, because emotions are so useful. On the one hand, you could say, isn't that terrible that we were ignoring them? Or worse than ignoring them, we relate to them as problems. And the only if people in schools think about emotions, usually it's the bad ones that get in the way, so-called, or assumed to get in the way. But they're really, really useful. Everything that you mentioned, Jim, the relationship between the subject matter and the children, the relationship between them and between each other, the relationship to their community, the relationship. This is something that in the after-school programs that the All-Stars run, it's talked about a lot of kids loving performance, or today the Times has an article on Hoboken High School and a theater thing they're doing, Guys and Dolls, I think it is, and they had quotes from the kids. And kids who get excited about something often are humiliated by being excited about it among their peers. It's like not a cool thing to do, unless it's the list of things you're supposed to be excited about. So that's that, and in the All-Stars after-school programs, they talk about that a lot and get help with that. So I just think that must be going on in classrooms as well, and it's such a wonderful resource to create a better learning environment.